Cargo.
Welcome to the first episode of Creative Cargo. We are here with Kuya, who is the creator of Poly Convenience Store, one of the most creative brands. Definitely check it out if you haven't seen it before.
What's up? I'm Kuya. I run Poly Convenience Store. It's a brand about a concept convenience store, and the front of it is like bright, and then but in the behind it's kind of more of a dark, deeper meaning.
So, what was your story of like your come up as a designer? Did you have a lot of design experience? Were you like a graphic designer or anything, or was there any experience that you had that kind of helped you with Poly?
Funny enough, it actually started all from YouTube, but not only that, like Minecraft YouTube. My first aspiration ever in life was to be a Minecraft YouTuber, and so with that came like it really came everything, right? Because I had the idea of like trying to talk when I would do YouTube videos, and then I taught myself things like Photoshop, Illustrator, doing thumbnails. Back in the day, there was this dude that made a free rig for Cinema 4D where you upload your Minecraft skin and like you rig it up and stuff. And so all that I slowly learned like all the programs, Premiere for video editing. But yeah, that was the very first start of my like designing.
That's actually funny because I literally had the exact same like experience. I might recognize the name of the Cinema 4D model if you can remember the name, but definitely shout out to Minecraft because that's
Yeah,
awesome.
literally everything I like in a way attribute to Minecraft, because it's like even just the general creativity, and just like the world, like I was really encapsulated in that whole thing. It's nice.
So how did that slowly become Poly? Like how did you first get interested in creating a brand, and how was the beginning of your brand?
Well, I think it was either sophomore or junior year. I was like 16, 17, and that was when I first found Reddit. And I think for a lot of people in high school is where you kind of figure out your style and how you want to dress. So it started out with like male fashion advice, that subreddit, and then slowly getting into and discovering streetwear. From there, I was just more of a fan at the time, supporting smaller brands myself. One day I was going around Streetwear Startup, which is another subreddit that I found that had smaller brands, and I would always scroll it all the time until eventually I was like, what if I just tried this on my own, Because I noticed that a lot of the people that were making stuff, like, it sounds weird to say now, but I felt like I could do at least as good, you know what I mean? And so I started with that. I had two brands previous that were obviously very, really beginner, amateur, not that great. And I posted the designs as critique. And the first ever time I posted it, I got ripped, man. Yeah, and then, I kept reiterating and restarting the brands, like with the name and the ideas, until eventually one day I was in the library and I was just coming up with like, okay, this is what the brand's gonna be, this is what the photo shoot would be like, and the designs. And then one night I was like, screw it, let's just do everything tonight. And I did an all-nighter, and then by the next morning I posted on Streetwear, I think. And funny enough too, it was one of those sites where you put up the design and it gets produced after someone buys it. So it was really like not even a brand, you know what I mean? It was just kind of like all online. People gave me good feedback on that finally. And I think it was like 3 sales the first day, but that was enough for me to like continue off of that initial idea. And then the very next one is when I first got the first taste of like, okay, this is what it means to be a brand. And I took all the money that I received from those 3 shirts and reinvested it all into like a full screen printed t-shirt drop.
Would you say that print on demand is a good first step for an upcoming brand, or do you think they should just go dive in?
I would say print on demand is like a last resort almost, Obviously for someone like me that was in the same situation, yeah, do it, because, being in high school, literally there's like zero money and you have none to invest. It's obviously something that you do and then you move off of as quick as you can, just because of the unreliability and the quality of the shirts itself. But yeah, in terms of like getting your actual foot in, I would say that like the best place to start is designing a graphic shirt and then finding a local screen printer and just doing like the minimum quantity possible.
So you got your first few drops in. When did you really start to see your brand kind of grow from there? Like when was there any point in time where you saw like a crazy like pivotal moment where it just like kind of started taking off more?
I think all in all, it's been a really slow grind, at least for me personally. I have experienced also my own kind of jumps in like attention, especially when you drop. So like what usually happens is it'll be kind of quiet and then you drop and then there's a huge uptick in like engagement and followers and stuff like that. Back in the day, back in on Instagram in around 2018, I believe, was when me and like a bunch of other brands were like daily posting, and that was when one of the times where engagement was one of the highest, right? It was an experience that really taught me that it's kind of a tug of war, right? and judging between like, okay, this is your kind of influencing like content creation side where you kind of put yourself out there and you're really extroverted and just being active and building this community, with the other side of trying to learn yourself, especially if you didn't go to school. Like I learned pretty much everything all myself, all online. And so you kind of have to balance, like you could either be this brand that's like, yeah, really out there, but you're going to sacrifice things like improving your skills and your design. After that 2018 of really just posting every day, I kind of slowed down and took a step back, and because of that I did in a way sacrifice, like, yeah, the community isn't as active anymore and like the growth isn't as exponential as before. But for me, my focus is like trying to learn as much as possible and evolve as much as possible, so that in the long run, I have that to show, rather than just like, me posting every day and having this audience, but the clothes and things that I'm making, I'm not the most proud of. It's a balance, you got to kind of choose in between, and like, because you can't just make stuff and then never post it, because I've seen some of those people, right? It's like, so I know some of the most talented people, but for whatever reason they just don't draw up because they're too, I don't know, busy or for whatever reason. But yeah, it's kind of hard because there's two sides, right? There's the creative side and the business side.
That makes a lot of sense. You started seeing that kind of like growth, right? You saw that like little pivotal moment when you saw that engagement and all that growth, but that was because you were sacrificing the creativity for the business.
It's all a attention thing, and it's kind of interesting because that's how the like attention can almost be seen as a currency. I'm not even the most like business fan, but I did. Have you ever heard of like Gary Vee? Like a long time ago, he's talked about like, he always talked about like, oh, attention, attention. He became a meme in himself. Like at the end of the day, it's true, like how you spend your attention, how people spend their attention on you, but also like how you spend your attention focused on certain things. And it's just like, you can see that with how people deal with careers. Like people always say like, oh, I need to focus on family, or like, and they juggle that between career and family. And so that's a kind of form of currency of attention, right? And then as you as an artist, it's like you have the creativity or you have the business side. And part of the business side is like marketing yourself and creating content and posting and building a community.
Do you try to curate what you pay attention to find the right inspiration for your designs? Like, is there sometimes where there's some stuff you try to avoid when you're making designs, like some sort of stuff that you try not to pay attention to, or any sort of habits that you try to prioritize when you're kind of getting that creative space?
Nowadays, because of like all of the information that we have, it can either work as a crutch or it can work as a useful tool, right? So sometimes when I feel like I don't really have any ideas, especially as of late, I have kind of formalized a method of like setting a time, like, okay, I'm going to sit here, I'm going to do research, whether that's exploring through archives and kind of looking into the history of clothing through designers, looking through feeds, right, like Instagram, Arena, Pinterest, and seeing all these like different areas of inspiration of people really like pushing design and just being aware of like what's out there in the world. And through that, I found really great details and things that I'm really a fan of that way. And at the same time, I'm also just trying to naturally surround myself, right? So that even when you're not formally sitting down, you still have that creative mindset. And I think that's something that all creatives kind of naturally relate to as well, right? Like sometimes you're at the museum or you're watching a movie or you're listening to a song, things spark from those moments, right? Like moments where you don't expect them. Like I remember one time I was just going out with family and there's this broken down structure, like I think it was a sign or something that used to be there, but they took it down. And from that, like it just gave me this feeling. And it's being aware of that feeling and then questioning it yourself, right? So like that gave me that feeling, and now how can I rationalize that into words, into an idea, into a thought, right? So seeing that sign and then me rationalizing that into word association, right? Like destruction, distressing, or like, the idea of what the world and what structures that we built might look like after our existence, all that from just that sign. And so it's really a mix of like setting yourself up for creativity. That's how you can get ideas.
I love that. That's actually, I love how you put that, and I love hearing about your creative process. So in terms of brands, do you ever send clothing to celebrities or anything, any like sponsor or anything in that sort of nature that you've done before?
I mean, I've had a few interactions. I think one of the most like well-known or kind of infamous was when I sent like this t-shirt to Goldlink. That was a whole fiasco. Basically what happened was I sent this t-shirt to Goldlink when I was first starting. I want to preface as well, like I was young, you know what I mean? So the way I navigated around it and handled it probably wouldn't have done it the same way now, but I sent him the shirt, and then maybe like a year later he released this merch for his upcoming tour. And the idea behind that was that they were taking all of these thrifted shirts and then kind of repurposing them with his tour and like all the cities and dates on the back. A pretty cool idea, you know. But one of those shirts was my shirts, the one that I gave to him. And so my thing at the time was I kind of DM'd him and I was like, oh, would it be cool if like I can get recognition, or you know what I mean? Because at the time there was a Hypebeast article and like, you know, the main image was my shirt like repurposed. Obviously no credit was given or anything like that. And it was just one shirt. It wasn't like a mass production of it, obviously. Yeah, I probably wouldn't have done it the same way. Because for me, it was the principle of them taking the shirt, repurposing it, and then it getting on Hypebeast. And, you know, especially, I think it was even more so of a driver because I was so small at the time. And, like, that recognition would have really helped, you know? Like, I don't really send influencers things much anymore unless I'm like a really big fan of them and I believe that they will truly wear that thing, right? Oh, one of the most recent ones was I sent to Kyle
Kyle
Kuzma.
Kuzma.
His stylist hit me up and he liked one of my hoodies, so I custom made like a hoodie for him and I sent it out. But yeah, that's one of the things I'm like okay with now, right? It's like if they personally hit me up and they like a piece, yeah, I'll send it to them, you know what I mean? Or like if I respect what they're doing. But nowadays I'm more kind of strategic about that stuff. Like I won't just send out anything to anyone.
I want to say the Goldlink thing is like such like a. I would literally, if I were you, I would literally never imagine that would happen in like a million years. Did they ever reach back to you or?
Yeah, they're trying to jump me. And that's why also like I'm just kind of careful. Like I've met people, enough people in the industry to know like who to be careful with, you know. It's like the music industry, there's some suspicious people out there. They hit me back like kind of aggressive, like I wasn't expecting it. One of the dudes, like he was a designer, I guess. He responded like, I don't care, and he was like, come meet me in BK, which I guess is like somewhere in New York, I guess. He was like, come meet me out there, we could fight or something over it. When I was just like this kid, just like, oh, is it okay if I get a shout out from it? So it's a mix of like just knowing what battles to pick, who to talk to and avoid, and also just like how I communicate now, especially, you know, because at the time I was just like, I think I was like 17, wasn't really aware in general, but good lessons to learn.
That is a crazy story though. That's like
Yeah.
insane how that happened. Did you just like stop responding and just like let it go, or were you like, yeah, I'll meet you like wherever, let's go?
After I DM'd Goldlink and then he kind of he gave me his piece, I just blocked him. At the time I did like a few Reddit posts just kind of like talking about it, like, oh, I'm not really getting recognition for this and this is the situation. And I think that's what really kind of sparked it like the most. Like it got a lot of recognition and it kind of sent like negative attention towards Goldlink's way as well. So that's what kind of made it worse, you know. And so, but I mean, at the time, I was kind of was glad that at least I got like recognition from what I did, but I was also kind of scared because like his team and stuff, like you know, they're all grown men, and I'm just a kid at the time. They're all saying these stuff.
Yeah.
They're saying like, "Oh, we're gonna sue for defamation." I was like, "What's defamation? What's suing?" You know.
I guess on that topic, have you had any situations where your design at risk from being like stolen or kind of copied, or have you had any situations where you've had to really be protective of your designs?
Not too much other than that. I mean, I think I've just been lucky for the most part, like, because I, you know, always have friends that, like, they'll release stuff, and especially, I have one friend who just keeps getting ripped, and it's crazy too, and that's also a lesson to be learned. It's like, in fashion, there really isn't any protection as far as, like, design goes, and that's one of the unfortunate things, and it's also something that I don't really have an answer for. For something like art or like illustration, if someone copies that, then you can at least point to your piece of work, like, and oh, this was my copyright and I own it, and you can prevent it in that way. But in terms of fashion, it's hard to prove to courts, at least in the US. I'm not exactly sure how it works around the world, but it's hard to prove that like a specific design or detail choice is yours, right? And that's why you see brands like Zara, brands like Shein, or you know, they're stealing all these designs, and it's crazy because they just don't get in trouble. And I have one of my friends who pretty much got his designs almost one-to-one ripped. You know what I mean? Like you can tell the colorway, the silhouette, and the details inside of it. It's like obviously his design language, and he has like pieces like side by side. You can tell it was copied, but because of how the laws work and copyright and patents, there's not really anything you can do. And that's when you kind of go to rely on the social justice side, right? Like me going on Reddit and like laying out the situation and then people reading it and being like, oh yeah, that's kind of scummy, you know what I mean? But that's pretty much the extent of the protection and laws that we have of design or in fashion.
In terms of people that are up and coming, right? People that are trying to create their own clothing brands, or people that are already making their own designs but are still on the come up. Do you see any common mistakes that you think could be easily prevented, or things that you think people should be trying to prevent or avoid?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things. One of them is it's a pitfall that a lot of people run into or fall into when they first start out, and it's something that like I kind of fell into as well. And it's hard because it's not really preventable in a way because it's based on ignorance, right? And it's good and bad. You can kind of when you first come into like the space, you don't really know that much, and so it's not knowing what you how do you say it? Not knowing what you don't know or something like that. And so basically you're really like arrogant, like you think you can do all of these things and kind of come into the space and like disrupt. And in a way you can, and for a lot of people it helps, but it also is a crutch sometimes because people kind of just stop at where they're at and they think that they know everything, and they kind of limit themselves in learning and putting themselves out there more to learn, right? Like improving their fundamentals in just understanding fashion, understanding design, understanding the history. And by doing that, if they just kind of research and like take a step back, or not even a step back, but just kind of walk slowly, I guess, in terms of that analogy, and just like make sure you're properly learning things on the way, reminding yourself that there's always more to be learned, no matter how deep you are into fashion or design in general. In my, I think, like 6 or 7 years now of kind of designing in fashion, I still consider myself like a beginner, right? Like there's so much more for me to learn. There's always people above me that know more that I could learn from, or people below me that have a fresher kind of perspective and kind of mindset that they can provide for me and like what I do and what I create.
Do you consider yourself like a student of the game still to this day?
Yeah, I consider myself like a student to like the world, like to life, you know what I mean? There's always something that you can kind of pick up on, and obviously you'll never be like a kind of expert in like the fashion industry or whatever industry that you work in, but also there's this idea of picking up new things, right? Like I remember a while back I started doing like other hobbies like jujitsu. Like that's another thing that you're kind of a beginner at, and then you can kind of take philosophies and ideas from that back into your practice, right? Like if you're doing this, what if you went into ceramics or pottery making or sculpting? What if you went into 3D design, right? Like there's so many different areas that you can kind of learn and improve on, like it's kind of like, I don't know if you played like those video games where you have these like skill trees, right? Like World of Warcraft has these skill trees, and you can pick a max of one and just kind of like build off from there, right? Like if you think of life in those terms, with life you can choose as many as you want, right? You can choose every tree and like build from there. And so that's how I like to see it. Like you can never, there's no limit to what you can learn and also improve on. So I think it's best if we kind of maximize that and take advantage of that opportunity.
That's pretty much it for the questions. I think now we can kind of move on to, if you don't mind, showing some of the behind the scenes of some of the designs that you made.
So this one I'll show you one of the it's essentially like my board. But yeah, this is my typical like process of, yeah, this is my typical process of like how I go about things and how I kind of lay out all my ideas and things like that. As I was talking about earlier, right, with the like sign that was stripped down, and this is a recent kind of design structure for me as of late, was just like it all starts from a premise, right? So how this started for me was I was scrolling on TikTok and I saw this guy wearing this hat, and immediately like I had this feeling from it, so I paused it and screenshotted it, and I was like, what is this that gives me this feeling, right? And this was the screenshot. It was a tailor-made hat from this, it was from like a show, like a Storage Wars show or whatever. But the way that it looked, right? Like I didn't even know what it was. I couldn't put it into words at the time. I just screenshotted it. And then afterwards I went back and kind of rationalized like, okay, what is this? And for me, that questioning, first of all, it was an association with red, right? Like my brand kind of, it's the color scheme is like red, white, black, and stuff like that. But that was kind of the first thing that tipped me off, but also the distressing. And so questioning that, it brought me to this idea and premise of like, oh, what would it look like if you found this hat in a abandoned convenience store or a lot, right? And it was just like a super interesting object and an artifact of a piece of time. And so this is all stems from this premise of this screenshot. And it fueled the idea and kind of branched out into the rest of these ideas. And so from there, I kind of built that plot and the storyline into how I would express that. And it goes into, I did some research on like history and how I would express like, okay, abandonment and with convenience stores or buildings, right? Like, what does that look like, especially on like a temporal level, like with time? And so I went back and I kind of studied vintage hats from like the 40s all the way up to the 80s. And I really liked how these hats were affected by design, right? And like, this is a natural occurrence, especially with the colors and things like that. But you can see how, for example, this Buffalo's hat, it was from an old baseball cap, but you can already see like the inspiration. This was one of it too. Like, I saw this, and right here with the that's where the idea for the label came, the tag, and it was a connection I made. Like, when you kind of buy produce, like they have stickers on them, right? And so I saw this, I was like, that's a really unique placement. And so how could I interpolate that into like an actual garment piece, especially with the white turning into cream, right? That's suggesting a passing of time, all the faded colors, and also the history of like, okay, why is that underbill green and why did they choose gray? And finding out that like, oh, that was the actual color that they chose back in the day, this green. And then even exploring into faded greens. Here's one of the crumpled up, like seeing how time affects garments, right? And then also seeing this inspiration with this hardware, a really unique piece of hardware too. It's like a, I forgot what it was called, like a zip back hook. And then moving on to kind of collecting visual images that also represent that feeling and gives me a similar feeling. Like this, like it's something super off and different from what the actual design is, right? But it goes kind of back to that creative thinking that I was talking about, and having that mindset of always just being creative and having this divergent mindset with stuff, to that like having this poster, like to me this was anti-design. This was like a really for me it evoked like this feeling of like similarly like destruction and unorder and things like that. And so that's one of the images that I saved. Here's some others among them that kind of gave me inspiration of like the scatteredness and the disorder. And then another part of that then goes to the concepting. I worked with like a lot of revisions. I talked with a lot of people. I was told like multiple times throughout the whole thing, like, this sucks, and it's having that humility to be able to be like, okay, I spent like weeks, months on this thing, and then I'm just going to throw it away. You know what I mean? And having the humility to be like, okay, yeah, maybe I do have to restart on this. So these were some of the early like concepts and like typography that I was kind of working with. I wanted to give it like I was juggling in between a convenience store hat, but at the same time, I want it to be wearable, right? Like if it's gonna look up straight up like a convenience store hat, people might not, they might be turned off by it because they might look like a worker or something. I don't know. But yeah, here's all the iterations, and that's another important thing too. It's like coming up with an idea, reiterating it like hundreds of times, and then after that 100 reiterations, like just abandon it. There's more mock-ups that I was creating during the time. And then eventually I got to kind of like these different formats, and in those kept going, kind of developed the idea more and like more physical details, right, with the ripped nylon over the cotton, and then deciding, going back to this, obviously, like, okay, what am I going to use? I'm going to use like specifically enzyme washed cotton to express that like passing of time and the oxygenation of the fabrics, not using white, using like cream if anything. And then here's where the final colorways were decided. There's the red, the blue, and the black. These weren't released yet, but I'm planning on releasing them soon. And then to the final render, as well as the physicals right here. But you can see kind of where all the planning and ideas went into the final design. Like the gray being like a really washed gray. On the back, I kind of put this like QC logo. And thinking back to that poster with all that disorder and all that kind of stuff, like this was a way I could represent that by including that on the back, you know what I mean, and just being really like raw. But yeah, and then stuff like the bill patch, the side patch being a raw edge, and then more expressing of time, just again with the cream instead of white. This was based on a vintage Seiko dial within the inside. And this was another one of my kind of ideas that I've been formulating, which is having a deeper hidden design that's not like obvious at the front end of it. Like I didn't outwardly express these details, right? but once you get and receive the item, it's like, okay, this is what you understand and know of all the features, but then once you receive it, you know, you have this opportunity to explore and discover. And so if people look deeper, they can kind of see that like there's a clock face on the inside, and it was inspired by these vintage Seiko dials that I kind of came across that were being produced in World War II. But it kind of gives a play on time at the same time. And then here's on the inside, on the underhand, yeah, screen printed. It says Kuya is watching you, and that was a little kind of like a ironic. I wanted to add something ironic and like a nod to, like, if you peek under here, it's like a kind of like a kitsch design. Kitsch is kind of like a tongue in cheek or like ironic on purpose, right? And so I was considering either putting like a really purposely corny like phrase on the either the underbill or there, and this was the what I decided on. But just Kuya is watching you, and it was kind of based on the overall overarching idea of the brand as well. It gets deep, right? Because it goes into like government wrongdoings and like the idea of like Big Brother's watching you, right? Because Kuya is, it means Big Brother in Filipino, and so yeah, it's kind of a play on that.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's interesting too because again, it's like a post rationalization, right? Like this, like when I first saw this thing, to me, I just liked it, right? But from that, I built it and created all this storyline and these ideas. Same way with Kuya. Like I think when I first came up with Kuya, I don't know what the reasoning was, but as I kind of developed my brand and had this idea for it, I made that connection like, oh, Kuya and Big Brother. It goes together with the idea of government and like all of the atrocities and like things that has been committed, and so tying it in through all the way to this, you know, putting Kuya's watching you is pretty interesting.
The amount of detail in this is actually insane, and I love the journey from the beginning to the end. It's like I love the creative process. It's actually insane. But yeah, so I think we've gotten like a lot of stuff out of this. I think this is an insanely valuable and interesting interview. Your story is just incredible, and I'm very excited to see where Polly goes next. But yeah, I just wanted to thank you so much for hopping on the call and having this interview with me.
Dude, thank you as well. Nice talking to you, and I hope this hopefully inspires or like gives someone some kind of idea to like, you know, push everything forward, you know. I think it ends up helping everyone in the long run, right? Like for me, I was at this certain level until I met like my friends and seeing what they were doing, and also seeing like people out there like Virgil Abloh or like Samuel Ross or, you know, people in that space, and even not in fashion but just art, right? Like just creating those sparks of ideas that you can then branch out and, you know, evolve back into your own space. And like this idea, you know, it's in fashion, but it comes from like contemporary art, it comes from performance art and all of these different things and like history and things like that. And so by, you know, putting it out there, I hope that other people can kind of build off of that and create more stuff that we can then like communicate between each other and like inspire.